Welcome to MacVoices TV. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this may be the last time in 2011, or at least his last book in 2011, that we talk to Joe Kissell. This time he's authoring Take Control of Mail on the iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch, 3rd edition. Joe, happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you too. Nice to be here as always.
Yeah, we're not talking about the Thanksgiving book, unfortunately.
No, well,
Hey, it's still valid. It's still good. I love that book.
Yes. I referred to it when I was cooking my own Thanksgiving dinner, and I don't know how I could have gotten by without it. So
I think one of these days we need to ask you to move your setup into your kitchen, and maybe we can do it. Take control of turkey or something.
Well, that's really interesting. Actually, the last time I was at Macworld, which is a couple of years ago, we did a special food episode where you and I were talking about restaurants in San Francisco, and those sorts of food shows are always lots of fun. So yeah, and now, I mean, my old apartment where I was living until the beginning of August had a really lousy tiny little kitchen, but now I have a real kitchen. It has a proper oven and a proper stove and a proper refrigerator, and it actually has some space in it. So it's something I could even imagine doing. So that could be kind of fun.
Okay, maybe we just came up with a holiday project.
All right, Christmas cookies.
Christmas. I'm sure in Paris you probably have a few good recipes for Christmas cookies.
Yes, well, they take their Christmas food very seriously here.
Yeah.
So
they take food very seriously, period.
Yes.
So I need to keep looking over and make sure I get it all. Take Control of Mail on the iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch, 3rd edition.
Yeah,
3rd edition, Joe.
So we have this very cumbersome title, and in a previous show, I talked about why this title is so obnoxiously weird and long. And it's sort of this long story. There were good historical reasons for it. Now you might look at this and say, well, why don't you say iOS device? And that would kind of make sense, except that, number one, a lot of people, like, they can identify iPhone. I know what that is. An iPad, they know what that is. But iOS device doesn't mean as much to people. And then the other thing is, whenever we change the title of a book, it's this really massive, complicated procedure because of changes in ISBNs and all kinds of cataloging things, and it just makes sort of life difficult. So, all awkward as it is, we have now moved on to the 3rd edition of this wonderful title. And this is the edition. I mean, the main reason for this is to cover all the changes in iOS 5. And there's also some stuff about Lion and some other new things there, but we just realized that so much had changed that we really had to update the book in a big way.
Joe, what's interesting, especially to me about this, is that you see articles online proclaiming email is dead, email is dying, email is no longer relevant in an age of text and Twitter and the social networks. And I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is business, but also just that maybe it's dying for the super tech savvy, cool kids. But I don't think so. But even so, there are an awful lot of people out there that rely on mail as one of their primary methods of communication for family, friends, and business.
Oh, sure. I mean, my email volume hasn't gone down over these years, even though I've added Twitter and I've added, Facebook and RSS and a whole bunch of other ways of getting information and sharing information. I still get tons and tons of email, and for me it works a lot better. I mean, there are certain friends of mine who I mean, maybe I'm just too old, but actually, no, I won't even say that, because the friends who are committing this offense are as old as I am, and the offense is sending me messages on Facebook instead of sending me messages by email. Now, it's not that they don't have my email address; they do have my email address, but they insist on sending me private messages in Facebook instead. And I understand how Facebook works. I mean, it's not that I'm technically incompetent to go in there and answer a message, but it bugs me because, well, for a number of reasons, but in particular because in my mail application, in my IMAP storage area, which then means, in mail on my Mac and on my iOS devices, my iPad, my iPhone, and anything else I might use to check my email, I have records of hundreds of thousands of email messages going back years and years and years. So if I want to find something, I know where it is. It's right there. But sometimes I'll be looking for something and I know for sure that somebody wrote to me about something or I wrote back to them about something. I know it, I know it, I know it. I'm absolutely sure, but I can't find it in mail for anything. And then I realize, oh, they sent me a message in Facebook and I replied in Facebook. So it's now a completely separate place that I have to go to look for messages, and the searching for messages in Facebook is not nearly as good as the searching in mail, and you don't have all the same controls over formatting and quoting and just a million rules and a million other things. So yeah, I mean, I get that that's often an easy way for people to do things. And certainly Twitter has a lot of value for certain. I mean, I send direct messages, I send replies and stuff on Twitter all the time. But you're absolutely right. Email is far from dead, and there are lots of things about email that are really necessary and honestly just fine the way they are.
Interesting point. I hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms, but I've had similar experiences. I guess I just hadn't pulled it all together. And I know one of the things that came out of some of the blog world presentations this year were that Google is no longer crawling Facebook. It doesn't crawl Twitter, so it's difficult to find things in there. And you're right, Facebook and Twitter, probably to an almost equal extent, are really the kind of casual conversations, but they're not a great place to archive things. They're not a great place always to do threads of discussions.
Right.
So mail is still absolutely relevant. And now we have all kind of options to have our mail everywhere on our iDevices. It's no longer just the purview of our Mac. It's this book. It's iPhone, iPod Touch, and iPad.
Right. Well, to sort of cut to the chase about what's new and why we needed this new edition of the book, iOS 5 does. I mean, you could look on any number of websites and see the list of new features in Mail and see the other new features that affect Mail in some way. But what they don't exactly tell you is that iOS Mail has gone between the upgrade from 4 to 5. It has gone from being a so-so, a decent mobile client to being a pretty good replacement for a desktop client. That is to say, as mobile clients went before, Mail was okay, but now it has 90% of the features of any decent desktop mail program. So it is now suddenly possible or reasonable to think about using your iPad, for example, as your main mail device. It can now do things that previously you had to go to a desktop email program or webmail interface or whatever to do. And that's huge. Now, there are still some missing bits. It's not perfect yet, but it's way better. It is so close to what a desktop client can do now that it's really very exciting because email for me is not just a means of communication. It's where I spend a great deal of my time. I mean, a great deal of my work time as well as a great deal of my personal time communicating with people. This is my main means of communication. So it's really great for me that Mail on the iOS devices has improved to the extent that it is almost as good as a desktop mail client. And so, when I started working on this version, I looked over the list of new features and I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a minor update. And then I started writing, and I realized, oh well, there's this too, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and before I knew it, the book had just, ballooned. And I'm like, well, this isn't a minor update. This is a whole new edition. So I mean, really, we actually planned to not charge for it because we thought that the amount of data in it that was new was going to be so small. But as it turned out, there's a ton of new data, so we are going to charge for it. But it's really good stuff. It tells you how to do all kinds of things with your iOS device beyond just using the features and ways that most people can figure out by themselves. It tells you how to get stuff done, and I'm really quite excited about it.
Third edition. And
Third
like you
edition.
said, a lot of people are going to perceive that, well, Joe, this is nice, but this is probably for the new iPad or iPhone owner or someone who's not familiar with this. I already know everything I need to know about mail on my iDevice. And you're telling me that's not really quite true. There's a lot more there a lot more depth to it that most of us probably haven't found.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, uh, on one level, you're correct that if you are a well-informed person, and if you are familiar in particular with mail on previous versions of iOS, and you've spent some time playing with it and looking at it on iOS 5, there's nothing that there are a few things that you can't figure out. But
Okay.
what I've done, or what I've tried to do, is to, which is sort of, this is my thing. I mean, this is what I do with all of my Take Control books, is I save you the bother of having to figure things out from scratch, because Apple's documentation for iOS is pretty minimal, and you can Google things, but you're going to find a lot of errors, a lot of crap, a lot of advertisements, a lot of conflicting information. And so I'm trying to save you time. I'm trying to save you bother. I'm trying to uh, do all the hard work of trying everything out and figuring out the best way to do things, figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and just saying, here it is. This is how you do this. There was one thing in particular that I'm thinking of that almost stumped even me, and not to boy am I smart or anything, but uh, one of the new features in iOS 5 Mail is support for SMIME, which is an industry standard for encrypting and digitally signing messages. So Mail on Mac OS X has had this from way back. And if you want to send a private message to somebody, make sure that it's not intercepted in transit. Make sure that nobody, can spoof your address. That messages coming from you, messages that appear to come from you, really did come from you, and that everything is safely encrypted. There's this mechanism you can use to do that, and it's called SMIME. Now, on a Mac, even though Mail has had this capability for a long time, Apple didn't go out of their way to make it easy to use. In fact, in my book about Mail in Snow Leopard, I spent 11 pages talking about this feature because it was that hard to use. Well, in my book on iOS Mail, I say, if I were to give you all the detail you really need to use this properly, it would be considerably longer than 11 pages, because as awkward as it was to use on a Mac, it's even more awkward to use on an iPhone. I really, I truly cannot imagine what must have been going through the minds of the people who designed this feature in Mail at Apple. Um, it looks as though they were intentionally making it opaque, just bizarrely hard to use. It is far, far, far from user friendly. And even I had difficulty figuring out how to use it. And once I figured it out, I'm like, oh, that's nasty. I mean, I can do it. Like, if somebody sent me an encrypted message, which happens sometimes, at least I can say it is now possible for me to read this message on my iPhone. It will no longer just say this message cannot be downloaded and then force me to go to my Mac to read it. It is now possible for me to read it, so that's nice. I'm really happy about that. But I am very unhappy about how it was implemented. And it's, it's done. It's almost as though Microsoft engineers infiltrated Apple and, took over this feature of mail. Sorry.
Ooh, that sounds good.
But
Yeah,
it's
that's bad, Joe.
I know. No, but it's just really terrible. And so it seems to be a feature that really wasn't designed to be used, or just sort of like, well, our enterprise customers are insisting that it be there, so we'll put it in so that we can check off that box, but we don't like it and we don't want it to be there, and we're not gonna make it easy to use. So, but point being, most of the things in mail can be figured out just by sort of, tapping around and poking around. But there are some things that you probably would never discover on your own. That's one of them, and I try to, explain how that works more or less in the book. And there are some other things that aren't exactly hidden, but also Apple didn't, trip over themselves trying to make you aware of them. Now, one thing that has been in mail for a couple of versions now, which was just sort of one of these things that was silently appeared without any fanfare. If you have two, three, four accounts, mail accounts set up on your iOS device, and you get a message in one account, it's now possible to file it in another account. Now, you could also do that in iOS 4 point, I forget where the cutoff was, but it's one of those things that Apple just added and didn't sort of mention it, or it just sort of like, it's there for you to discover if you know to look for it. It was important to me because that's something I do all the time. But there are a whole bunch of things like that where now if you get a message that was someone was CC'd on it, now you reply to that, and you have an addressee in the to field and another addressee in the CC field, and you realize you want to switch them, or you want to take the CC recipient and make that the to recipient, and then take away the other person. You can do that now. You can actually use drag and drop to move addresses around between 2CC and BCC. You could never do that before. And that is great. That's fantastically useful. But it just might not ever occur to you to try that because you never could before, and now you can. So there's a whole bunch of things like that. I have my little cheat sheet here. So if I'm looking away from the camera, it's because I'm trying to remind myself of what all these things are. Mail can now search within message contents. So it used to be that mail could only search message headers, the subject and to and from and so on. Now it can search within the messages as well, but the interface doesn't look any different. So you wouldn't know that this feature exists unless you actually tried it. And it doesn't always work. There are certain exceptions, certain situations where it doesn't work. So that's another little layer. This might be interesting to some people, is interesting to me. There are all these predefined account types. There's, MobileMe and now iCloud and Yahoo Mail and AOL Mail and Exchange and so on. Well, there's another default mail type that has now been added, which is Hotmail. And what's interesting about Hotmail is that if you have a Hotmail account and you add it in Mail, Mail actually uses Exchange ActiveSync to access your Hotmail account. So you get push email, you get push syncing of contacts and calendars through Hotmail, making Hotmail actually much more powerful than something like AOL Mail or Yahoo, that's just sort of more or less plain IMAP. So that again, I had to figure that out. Apple didn't mention that anywhere, but it's kind of a cool thing if you happen to have a Hotmail account. You can now manipulate mailboxes. This is one of the aspects of Mail that makes it more like a desktop client. So you can add, delete, rename, edit mailboxes in an IMAP account, which you could not do before. You can move a mailbox from one parent to another parent. You can flag or unflag messages, which is really cool. If you use Gmail, it's the same as starring or unstarring messages. And note syncing, and of course the possibly my favorite change in iOS 5 Mail is Notification Center. So now I can pick up my iPhone, glance at the lock screen, and see, oh, there's my new email. So I know I can see the subjects, I can see the first couple of lines, I can see who sent it. I don't even necessarily need to unlock my phone to tell whether I've gotten any interesting mail. And there are, of course, many other ways of using Notification Center too. So those are just a few of the really, really neat things that are in iOS 5 Mail.
Joe, because of you, and I've said this on the show plenty of times, I sort of centered my email world around Gmail. And because mobile me didn't always seem that reliable, it certainly wasn't as fully featured. Now we have iCloud, and now I'm hearing you say that the mail clients, that the native mail clients on the iOS devices are getting this much better, that they're approaching desktop status. Is it time for me to rethink my strategy, or should I just be using those clients as the interface for my, in my case, the Gmail strategy?
Okay, so I want to say a couple of words about Gmail and also a couple of words about iCloud. Um, Gmail, when you are accessing a Gmail account through the mail client on iOS 5, it's almost the same as it was before. So if you use Gmail and you liked it before, you'll like it at least as much now. You will gain some new capabilities, like the whole starred thing. That didn't work before, now it does. That's nice. Um, there are still some idiosyncrasies, but basically Gmail on an iPhone works pretty well. Now, there is now an official Gmail app for the iPhone. I've tried it and I don't get it. I mean, it's really it's almost no different from using Safari to access the Gmail website. The only thing it adds is Notification Center, but like you can't set up multiple Gmail accounts in it, and it's actually less powerful and less easy to use for me anyway than the mail client. So that's weird. There are lots of ways to access a Gmail account on an iPhone, Apple's own mail app being just one of them. But Gmail, the official Gmail app, is perhaps my least favorite way to do it, which is kind of weird. Now, one of the things that you used to be able to do only with a Gmail account, and this is optional depending on how you have it set up, is that you can get your iPhone or iPad or whatever to mimic the behavior of Gmail's archive button. So basically, you have a message that's in your inbox, and you want to get it out of your inbox, but you don't want to put it anywhere in particular, so you click the archive button. And from Gmail's point of view, what that does is it removes the inbox label so that the only place this message will show up is in the all mail label. So what you have been able to do on an iPhone or iOS device for some time is choose whether you want to delete messages, that is, move them to the trash, or whether you instead want to archive them, that is, remove the inbox label and just put them in all mail. So for example, when you swipe across a message, you can choose, do you see a delete button or do you see an archive button? So what Apple has now done is they have extended that behavior to iCloud accounts. So iCloud accounts have an archive mailbox or folder. It doesn't really work the same way that Gmail's does, but it's intended to kind of mimic that approach and give you a catch-all place to put things that you want to have out of your inbox, but you don't want to delete them. So you can again say, when I do the gesture that means delete, that is, I tap, I swipe across it and tap delete, or I tap the little, do not enter kind of sign. What do I, or tap where the trash can would be or whatever. What do I want to happen? And you can set it to archive. So the trash can icon goes away and becomes an archive icon. The delete button goes away and becomes an archive button. So that when you have a message in iCloud and you do that, whatever that gesture is, instead of deleting it, that is sending it to your trash, it instead puts it in your archive mailbox. So other than that, there's not a whole lot different in the way iCloud Mail behaves from the way mobile mail behaved, or from the way Gmail behaves. But there is, getting back to your earlier question, should you rethink your strategy at all? There is one thing about iCloud that is very disappointing to me. So it used to be that in iCloud, you could say, all right, I've got 3 or 4, 10 email accounts. I want to be able to use mail or log into the Mobile Me website and send mail using, using Apple's system, but I want it to look as though it came from another account. I want the from address that the recipient gets to be my Gmail address or my AOL address or whatever. So that when they reply, it'll go to that account, not to Mobile Me. You could do that in Mobile Me, but you can no longer do that in iCloud. So, but you can do it in Gmail. So I had been toying with the idea that maybe, this is before iCloud was released, that maybe I would switch from having Gmail as my central repository, other accounts forward to Gmail, and then I can send out from any address from Gmail, that maybe I'd switch over to iCloud. And that I would, have all of my mail from other accounts forwarded to iCloud. And then when I send mail out, I would just set up a bunch of different from addresses in iCloud and send out from there. But when I discovered that Apple had removed that feature that was part of Mobile Me, it's no longer part of iCloud, I just kind of went, oh, well, so much for that. So that really reduces the utility of iCloud for me, and it makes it impossible for me to consider using iCloud as my primary provider, because I really do need to maintain multiple addresses at multiple domains for important business reasons. And if Apple's not going to let me send mail from those addresses, then we're kind of out of luck.
I did not realize that about iCloud, but I remember that is one of the big features of Gmail. And it's nice. You can do it on a desktop client, pulling things in from everywhere, but it's nice to have it centralized, the old unified mailbox thing, that you can just, and especially up until now, as we see mail start to get a lot more capable, the mail app, a web interface, I mean, it may not have been perfect, but it was good enough. So you're making me think about going back and re-looking at the mail client a whole lot more than I have, especially because if I understand IMAP correctly from the desktop use, it would let me do some work offline. After this interview, I'm going to go get on a plane for a couple hours. It's a great time to catch up on email, compose some replies and everything. You can't do that if you're using the Gmail app, at least not right now.
And you've just reminded me of something else, actually. It's true that with IMAP, as long as you synchronize your messages to your local whatever device, you can work offline, and then you can compose messages, reply whatever. When you go back online, they get sent or whatever. It used to be that when you were setting up mail on your iOS device and you were selecting, okay, how many messages should mail download at once for a particular mailbox, your choices maxed out at 200. So if you say, I want to look in some mailbox that I haven't ever synced, tap that mailbox name. It's going to say, okay, hold on, I'm going to download the most recent 200 messages. And then if whatever you were looking for wasn't in there, you have to say, okay, scroll, download more messages, and then it'll do the next 200. Okay. What's new in iOS 5 is that you can now download up to 1,000 messages at a time. So, assuming you have, enough bandwidth, enough memory on your device, it's easier to take more messages with you. Now, unfortunately, there's still no way to say, just sync it all. Just pull down all of my messages from all of my mailboxes at once. You have to do it mailbox by mailbox. But at least you can now pull down 1,000 messages at a time, which is way better than 200. And I'm really happy about that.
I haven't found that. Is that in the settings?
Yeah, so let's see here.
We'll do tech support for Chuck, but I was ready to pull out my iPhone and say, okay, where is that?
All right, so let's see here. You go into Settings, Mail, Contacts, Calendars, and then, the account name, like your IMAP account. And then you tap Account. Then you tap Advanced. No, I lied. Oops. That's not where it is. Back up. Back on the main Mail Contacts Calendar screen. Under Mail, the first item, Show, then blank messages. So the choices now are 50, 100, 200, 500, or 1,000.
Oh, okay.
So I was thinking that was per account. It's actually global. So this will apply to all of your, IMAP and Exchange accounts.
Okay, well that's not a bad thing. I mean, especially if you're trying to manage a whole lot of accounts, it's just lets you do it all at once.
Yeah.
Okay. Joe, I was surprised to hear you even bring up Hotmail, and with all due respect to our friends who have Hotmail accounts, is Hotmail, you think, coming back from wherever it's been?
I don't know. I mean, Microsoft has done some rebranding. It's now Windows Live Hotmail, and it's associated with some other stuff in the Microsoft universe. Um, I have a Hotmail account. I have had a Hotmail account for eons. I have never used it for anything real. Um, However much Microsoft may have improved the infrastructure, like maybe it gets a lot less spam now, maybe it's harder to send out spam from a Hotmail account. I don't really know. For me, there were so many years of believing that Hotmail was just, kind of not to be trusted. Like, no, it's not a serious email account, it's just like something that any punk kid can get, and probably it is a punk kid because you get so much mail from so much spam from Hotmail accounts. Um, that mentality has just become so ingrained that I kind of think, well, yeah, why do we need it? Why would someone deciding I want a new email account even go there? I can't quite understand, because whatever else may be said about its technical capabilities, I don't think it's lost that stigma, and I really don't think it ever will. Hotmail, that word, that name, that domain name, just isn't associated with trust and quality. So I
And
don't know.
it may be beyond the scope of this discussion to some degree, but in a way, it's not. Because I tend to think sometimes the same thing about the .mac domain that we had, and now
Right?
the .me domain, and Yahoo, and even
Yeah.
Gmail. It does not cost that much to go out and get a domain name, pick
No.
something, get it, and then you can shift around from these services. Like as Joe has said about the Gmail, forward that account onto there, use that service as long as you have the ability to send from that service and have it look like you sent from your domain. You're set, and that includes all your iDevices.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So my main email address, my main email address for years and years, it has a private domain, and the account is currently residing at Gmail because I can set up my own custom domain. And I mean, it used to be at another provider, and it's moved actually between providers a few times. And if in the future I decide that I don't want it to be at Gmail anymore, I want it to be at Fastmail, or I want it to be, wherever, it's no problem. I have the control. I can move it to another provider, and the people that I'm exchanging email with will never know the difference. So yeah, I certainly advocate using one's own personal domain if possible. Again, unfortunately, not possible with iCloud, but it's certainly a much more professional way to go, and a much more flexible way to go.
Joe, last thoughts, last tip from the book, last thing that we really need to pay attention to with the new mail client in the iOS devices that you cover here that we really can take advantage of.
Well, there are a lot of other sort of little things. Like my new iPhone 4S has Siri, so I can now dictate email messages instead of typing them, which is nice. And the system-wide shortcuts feature, so it's like a text expander kind of thing. You can expand little abbreviations. That applies to mail too. There are tons of little touches. And so even if you're thinking to yourself, well, email is email, and these major new features aren't that big a deal. It could be that the combined value of all these little things really suddenly makes mail a lot more usable for you. So if you are one of those people who never really could take mail seriously on an iOS device, or if you felt like the only way you could get your work done is to use a webmail client or a third-party email client, I think this could really be the time to give mail another shot. That's especially true in the iPad because you have so much more real estate, screen real estate. You can have, your message list and your message side by side. You have the almost full size virtual keyboard and so on. But I think this is, mail on iOS devices is getting really, really close. It's absolutely worth another shot. And if you want some tips on how to arrange your email strategy so that it works best with your iOS devices, the book is full of them. And certainly for those people who depend on their mobile devices and depend on email, I really recommend it.
And I still love the phrase email strategy because that's really what it needs to be now. I don't know too many people that don't have at least two email addresses, a work and a
Right.
home, and usually it's more. And it's easy if you don't pay attention to it and set it up to either miss things, have things sent from the wrong place, or just get the whole thing screwed up. So
Yeah.
by all means, check out Joe's new book, which is, again, I got to check, Take Control of Mail on the iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch, third edition from Take Control Books. Joe, you said you were charging for this one. How much is this edition?
So the cover price is now. Let me scroll up to check myself because I always get confused.
Well, you have so few books to keep track of, Joe.
If I'm looking at this correctly, the cover price is $10, and then upgraders get it for $5. But there's as always, we try to be generous about if you purchased it fairly recently, we're not going to charge you for an upgrade and so forth. And unfortunately, I haven't internalized all those facts, but the Take Control website will give you all the the latest truth. And if you had an older edition of the book, I'm sure that you will receive an upgrade email with complete offer and all the details.
Great. Who knows? The next time the folks see us, we may be in your kitchen.
We may be.
We may be. Joe, thanks a lot. It's always fun. If I don't talk to you, have a terrific full holiday season.
Thanks very much.
Folks, taking control of mail on your iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. We'll be back with more again soon. Thanks for watching.